to understand today is talking about the powers that the president has when dealing with the legislative and the judicial branches. All right. Now, just so we're all on the same page and it'll make me feel better about things, at the very top where it says legislative and judicial powers, underneath the legislative, write the word Congress. And I don't know if it'll let you click up there. Can you put a text box up there? Okay. So under legislative, put Congress. And then underneath judicial, write down the Supreme Court. Okay? So essentially, guys, we're going to talk about some of the things that the president deals with Congress over, which we've talked a little bit about in here. But we're also going to talk about the presidential powers with the judicial branch. And you guys have already kind of seen that. You've seen it on the CNN news today. The president gets to appoint Supreme Court justices, okay? And there's a battle going on between the two parties in Congress on whether or not President Trump should be allowed to present one now or we should wait till after the election. So it's kind of some interesting stuff going on with this, okay? So just at the bottom of your paper, like we always have, there's a few definitions. But basically we're going to explain the presidential powers on how they are important as part of the system of checks and balances. And we're actually going to write this out a little bit today, the system of checks and balances. Some of the ones that I want you to know. All right. And then how he deals with the judicial branch. So at the bottom of your paper, if you'll notice, you've got about 5 different words: commutation, clemency, amnesty, reprieve, and pardon. Some of them are up here, and then their other ones are built into the text at the top. So we don't have to write all these out. But if you feel more comfortable writing them out so you'll understand them, then I suggest you do that. Because you will see these again on your test that I'm going to actually give you today. It's not going to be due until Thursday, but I'm going to add it into your assignment today after we get done with this part. Okay? So if you'll look at number 6 there, actually let's just go through them like this. Let's look at the word reprieve up here. The word reprieve says that it's the postponement of carrying out of a criminal sentence. So basically they just put on hold of carrying out a criminal sentence. So a reprieve, letter D, goes with number 8, where it says a postponement of the execution of a sentence imposed by court. That could be a life sentence, that could be the death penalty, that could be something of serious context, okay? So they're basically just postponing it until they either found new evidence or they merely want to look over what they have to make sure they're making the correct decision, okay? So reprieve simply means a postponement of a sentence. The next one, pardon, you've probably heard a ton of before. Pardon is letter E. It says that it's legal forgiveness of a crime. That is number 10. And I would underline the word forgiveness there. Pardon means to forgive or retract. They're taking it away. It's like it never happened. So the difference between a reprieve and a pardon is a reprieve simply postpones it. A pardon gets rid of it. You guys understand what I'm saying there?
Yes, sir.
Okay. The next one, the word clemency. Clemency, just think of the word mercy. When you see the M-E-N-C-Y in the word clemency, think of mercy. All right? So clemency is the power of mercy or leniency. That is letter B, and it goes with number 7. Okay? It's mercy or leniency given in cases involving federal offenses. So basically, they kind of take it easy on. Okay? All right, commutation is the power to reduce a fine or the length of a sentence. That is letter A. That goes in number 9. It's a reduction in the severity of a sentence. Now, I have noticed when we go over this test in class, people always get confused the word reprieve and the word commutation by their definitions. Reprievement, guys, is we're postponing it. I know I keep telling you that, but I just want to get it in your head. You're postponing it. Commutation, guys, is when you reduce the severity of it. They still have to deal with it, okay? They're just, instead of giving you a life sentence, we're going to give you 40 years. That's a reducement. That's a commutation, okay? And then lastly, an amnesty clause, it's a blanket pardon offered to a group of law violators. Amnesty, letter C, that is number 6. It's a general pardon offered to a group of lawbreakers. Look at it like this. Let's say Carroll County Sheriff's Office, and I'm not saying they would do this by any means, but I'm just trying to think of an example. Let's say that they catch 6 drug dealers, okay? And all 6 of them say, well, if you'll let us go, we'll tell you where we're getting the drugs from. Well, that would be a bigger prize for the Sheriff's Department than just getting 6 people with a little bit of marijuana or something like that, right? If they could catch the guy that was supplying it, that may completely shut it down, right? So the police may be like, okay, if you'll give us the name of who you're getting all this from, then instead of sending you guys to jail, we may give you community service. Y'all see what I'm getting at? So a general part, or they may simply let them go completely. Like, all right. So a general pardon offered is the word amnesty. It's offered to a lot of people. So if you kind of look at this, reprieve and commutation are similar, and then a pardon and amnesty are similar. They're exact same. All a pardon is for one individual. Amnesty is for a group. Is everybody with me there? Now, there is a reason that we are talking about these 5 words. Whose powers do you think, who do you think has those powers? There's only one individual for the federal government, and there's only one individual for the state government has that type of power. Who do you think that is? President. The President of the United States. Now, at the state level, who do you think can do those things? The government. Okay? So, we're going to talk about, that's the judicial powers that the President basically has over this, not the Supreme Court, but over lower courts. Now, do you ever hear the President using a pardon power or anything of that nature? Very rarely. Very, very rarely. So it's one of those things you kind of just need to know, but nobody really remembers that he can do it. But he does have the power to do so. All right? So those are basically the definitions for Section 4. Does anybody have any questions with that? Y'all with me there? All right, simple enough. So moving on. If you go back up to the top of your paper, it says, how can the President check the actions of the legislative and the judicial branches? Before we get into that in great detail, at the very bottom of your paper where you have the blank space down there, I want you to, how do I do this and make sure the people online, okay, I'll just do it on this piece of paper. So down at the bottom of that paper, we're going to draw a little checks and balances situation, okay? So label it, and I'm going to pull my paper over because this is not something that you guys, I got to make it look simple here. All right, so let's just label this checks and balances. And again, just write it to the best of your ability. There is an entire section on checks and balances, but I just kind of want to talk a little about them right now, just so it's not confusing. Okay? So here's how we're going to do this. We're talking about the presidential powers over Congress and the presidential powers over the judicial branch, right? So here's how I'd like for you to write this. I'm going to abbreviate. We're going to put presidential checks, okay? And who does he check on? He checks on Congress, which is the legislative branch, and then he checks on the Supreme Court. Now, I don't care if yours looks exactly like mine. I just want you to get the idea of this, okay? So, now guys, I'm only going to give you a few of these, okay? There's a bunch of checks that each of them have on one another. And you've got to remember something. Because of checks and balances, each branch has the same amount of power. They're all created equally. So the President doesn't have any more power than either one of the Congresses, or excuse me, either Congress or the Supreme Court. So, just for example purposes, what is something that the president has the ability to do to Congress? What can he check on them by doing? He can veto their bills, right? Congress can work extremely hard to try to get something passed, and he can tell them no. Is that a check that he has? Yes, it is. The second thing that I kind of want to get in your head that the president can do to Congress, and we've never talked about this before, is he can call them into session. Now, what do you think I mean by that? That he can call Congress into session. You guys know that Congress doesn't work year-round, right? They have certain sessions, and when we start talking about the legislative branch later on in the semester, this will make more sense to you. But let's say that something catastrophic happens and Congress is not in session. Well, Congress has the ability to declare war and do certain things like that, right? So if, let's just say that something like September 11th were to happen again. Hopefully it never does. But let's just say something that catastrophic happens and Congress isn't in session. Well, the president has the ability to make them come into work so he can declare war on probably whoever was at fault. Does that make sense? Now, he can go ahead and send troops wherever, but he's got to get an official declaration. Does that make sense? So he can call them into session if needed be. Okay? All right. You guys see how I kind of done that? Is everybody with me there? All right. We're only going to give you one check that the president has on the courts, and you guys should know this one already. He has the ability to do what with judges? He can appoint them. So simply write down appoint judges. Now that's what the president has the ability to do, right? Now, guys, can Congress do certain things to the president? Yes. Can the Supreme Court do certain things to the president? Yes. And we're going to talk about those when we get to those powers later, when we're actually talking about those specific branches. But right now, those are just a few of the ideas that the president has. Obviously, he can still do all these as well. Does that make sense? So, just to try to get that in your brain to make it make a little bit more sense. Okay? So, let's go back over here to your notes. So, how can the president check on the actions of the legislative and judicial branches? Now, obviously, guys, I gave you a couple down at the bottom here, okay? But here's some of the other ones that he does a tremendous amount of work with. The first one says he uses the message power to influence Congress to pass desired legislation. Okay, just to give you an example of this, the president basically controls the media, right? If the president's going to go speak about something, the media is going to be there. That's just how it works. Now, he can use the media in a fashion where he puts pressure on Congress to do certain things. George Bush done it so he could go to Iraq with Saddam Hussein. Bill Clinton's done it. President Obama done it. Obviously, Donald Trump's done it. All of our presidents have used the media in a way to put pressure on Congress, because if they present situations to the American people in a way that it looks bad, the American people, in turn, will put pressure on Congress to make them show action. Does that make sense? So he does his message power by doing that. The second thing we wrote down, he can veto bills. He can pardon citizens, which we talked about down here at the bottom. He can reduce fines, and he can grant amnesty. All those words we need to obviously know the definitions to. So those are a lot of things that he can ask to do. So if you look at number 1, at the top of your notes, it's asking you about the message power. Okay? It says, using his message power, the president regularly sends these 3 major messages to Congress. All right? So what is it? How can he send messages to Congress without ever going to Congress to tell them? And they're listed on the board. says the President sends messages to Congress to suggest legislation. There's 3 of them. So in letter A, write down the State of the Union. Okay? When the President delivers the State of the Union, he actually does that in Congress's chambers in front of the House of Representatives and the Senate. He does this in front of all of them. They sit there and listen to this speech. So the State of the Union is given in front of Congress. That's letter A. All right? The second message power that the President sends, put down, is his budget message. The President has to sign off on the budget. He helps create it. Does that make sense? Congress will help him create it, and then he basically has to sign it. So he's the one that tells which which cabinets and which parts of the government get a certain amount of money. So if he takes away money from certain things, what's he telling Congress? That they're not as important to him as other things, right? So he does it through his budgeting. And then lastly, through his economic report. Every so often the President has to report back to Congress how the economy is doing. And then they will dictate how they'll do different legislations based on how the economic part of it is working. Okay? So, the 3 types of message power. And guys, you may see a question on this on your test that's asking you, what does he deliver in these messages? State of the Union is just the overall report of American society, how we're doing as a society. Okay? Budget report's pretty common sense, how we're doing with money. And then the economic report is how the economy is flowing. Is businesses up? Is there more businesses coming to the U.S.? Are we making money? Are we losing money? Things of that nature. All right? Everybody with me there? Makes sense? So that is a presidential power over the legislative branch. Okay? All right. Number 2, it says the President's 4 options in dealing with a measure passed by Congress are. So, still talking about the legislative branch. And we're going to talk a little bit about his veto power. Now, guys, I'm not going to insult your intelligence. You've been hearing about how the President can veto stuff since you were in like 3rd grade. Okay? I'm pretty confident you all know that the President can say no to Congress if they pass something, right? So, very simple. What can he do? What can the President do in response to something that is passed by Congress? And they're right there on the smart board. The first one in letter A, very simple, he can sign it. If the President signs a bill, what does that bill become? A law. And it will be a law forever. Okay? So part A there, he can sign it. Part B, he can simply veto it. He can say no, that he does not like it. Presidents will use this on occasion simply because they don't like a bill or their party's platform didn't like it to begin with. Okay? So the first 2 is very easy. He can sign it or he can veto it. The next one is pretty unique. You guys have probably not heard about this one much. It says allowing the bill to become law by not acting upon it within 10 days. So basically, once Congress sends something to the President that they have passed, how long does he have to sign it or veto it? 10 days. If he does nothing to that bill in 10 days, it becomes law because he should have got around to dealing with it. You guys understand that? It's kind of a check that Congress has on him. Most presidents get around to dealing with it. They don't just let those sit on their desk. So, Part C, I would put down that they don't sign it, allowing it to become law. They don't sign it, allowing it to become law. And then lastly, Part D, put down the word pocket veto. You will be asked what a pocket veto is, okay? A pocket veto, guys, is when a president does not sign a bill at the end of a session. Okay? So, for example, let's say Congress has worked extremely hard on trying to get something passed, and then their session is about to end. So they've got a week left in their session, and they send it to the president. Only at this point in time, if the president does nothing to it, will it not become law because the congressional session ended within those 10 days. Does that make sense? that he didn't have enough time, so to speak. So, in letter D, I would put down a pocket veto, and it's when the president doesn't sign a bill at the end of a congressional session. Okay? And then it does not become a law. So basically, guys, look at it like this. If the president has 10 days to sign the bill and doesn't, it becomes a law. Y'all with me? If Congress sends him something very late in their session and he doesn't have the 10 days, then if he doesn't sign it then, it does not become a law because he wasn't giving the time to fulfill it. You guys understand that? And that's kind of a pocket veto. They kind of call it a pocket veto because they put it in their pocket and deal with it later. Y'all with me? So is everybody good on what he can do to Congress? How his message power provokes them to do certain things, and how he can do certain things with the ideas that they pass, right? Now, number 3 says, throughout history, presidents have requested the veto power to include what they call, put this down in number 3, a line item veto. Now again, I'm going to need you to know what a line item is. Number 3 is line item veto, okay? Now, what is a line item veto? Well, if you look at the word, you would think it would assume that when the president says no to something, he's not saying no to the entire bill. He's just saying no to certain parts of it. You guys understand that? So a line item is actually defined in the statement in number 3. It says that would allow them to cancel specific dollar amounts in spending. If you would, take cancel or whatever you got. I'm sorry, you're on a computer. Underline where it says cancel specific dollar amounts. So a line item, guys, allows the president to veto certain parts of a bill, not the entire bill. Like he may want to increase taxes on businesses. Y'all with me? And Congress may pass something that says that they're going to increase taxes by 30% on businesses, when the president simply wanted to do it by like 10%. Y'all with me? So he will veto the 30% and then tell Congress that he would like for them to make it 10. Then they'd have to redo the whole process and send it back to him. Y'all with me on that? So that's a line item. Number 4, we wrote down at the bottom, says Article 2 of Section 3 allows the president to call Congress into what we call a special session. And again, we described that a little while ago. And then number 5, it says no president has yet to use the power to blank Congress. The word that I'm looking for there is put adjourn. You will see it written a different way, but right now we're just going to make it adjourn. Okay? So no president has yet. He can simply kick Congress out if they're not getting anything done or they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. He can cancel it. Like, dude, y'all go home. Y'all need to take a break, figure something out. Okay? Now, I know I threw a lot of information at you there in about 40 minutes, or my clock says we've been talking for about 24. It feels like it's longer than that. Does anybody have any questions as far as what the president has to control over the legislative? The judicial power is easy, guys. The president gets to appoint justices, and then Congress has to approve them, okay? Once he's done that, he has no control over what those justices can do, all right? So that is it for Chapter 14. Does anybody have any questions about that? All right, what I'm going to do now, and I kind of told you this a minute ago before we started the notes, I'm actually going to give you the Chapter 14 test today. It's not going to be due until Wednesday night, tomorrow night, or excuse me, first thing Thursday. Y'all with me? Because I'm going to allow B-Day, if they have any questions, to come in and talk to me about it. All right? So I'm going to put this down due Thursday at midnight because that'll be the easiest way to do it. So essentially you've got today, tomorrow, and Thursday to do this. All right? But I'm going to send it to you now. You can look at it. You can make it finish it in class today. You've got 30 minutes left or so. All right? Plus I'm sitting here to answer any questions you may have. But I'm going to add that into the classroom tab right here in a second. and we'll go from there with it. So does anybody have any questions as far as anything Chapter 14 related goes? All right. So let me get that pulled up, and we will do it.